Well, hello there. We are ready to start the personal auto. Now, we've done the homeowners and we've done the dwelling. So now we're going to do personal auto in this section. So I'm going to share my screen with you here, and we are going to jump into this personal auto here. So this is the personal auto. It's the supplemental material for property and casualty. I'm Tammy Grisso DeLaura, and my school is Tammy DeLaura Insurance Educators. And of course, this course is not going to satisfy your pre-licensing requirement in your state, but it's used as supplemental material. And I think it's really going to benefit you so that you can pass the state test. Now, you are in the right place if you've been struggling with your property and casualty pre-licensing exam and you really want this career change. And you've taken a self-study or classroom class and there's so much material, it's very hard to figure out what's important. So we're going to streamline that information for you and learn the key points for this subject. Now, again, I have been in the insurance industry for 30 years. I've been teaching licensing classes for 27 years. I'm actually a subject matter expert for Pearson VUE, and I've purchased several insurance agencies. And I tell you this so that you will know that I'm in the trenches with you. So when I give you examples, these are real life examples. And I look forward to working with you on all of this material. Please follow me on Facebook and LinkedIn. It's under Tammy DeLaura Insurance Educators. And this is my motto: prepare, repetition, and confidence. You have to repeat this information over and over and over again so that you'll have the confidence to pass this test. So I want you to inhale confidence and exhale doubt. And let's get started. I always like to say the best time for new beginnings is now. This is my disclaimer because insurance does change and policy rules and state to state. So that's a legal thing I have to put in here. So let's get started on our personal auto policy. So there's two major automobile exposures that individuals seek protection on. First, people want to be protected against their liability in case they injure someone or damage someone else's property through the use of their automobile. And second of all, they also want to be protected if their auto gets damaged because of an accident with a theft or a fire or a collision. Now, there's some major definitions that we really have to pinpoint. And the first of those is the named insured. So this is the person that's shown in the declaration. This includes the spouse as long as they live in the household. Now, who else is included in this policy is called an insured. So not only does it include the named insured, which is your insured plus their spouse as long as they live in the household, but it also includes family members. Let's say that your mother lived with you or an uncle lived with you. And also it includes an insured is anybody that you give permission to drive your vehicle. Now, remember, a family member is any person related to the named insured who is a resident of the insured's household. So this includes those related by blood, marriage, adoption, and also includes foster child. So a family member technically does not have to ask for permission to drive the vehicle. Now, what is a covered auto? Usually what is included on this personal auto policy? And these vehicles have to be eligible, and they're called private passenger autos. Usually they're four-wheeled vehicles. They can include pickup trucks and vans. They're usually under a certain weight, and they're not used for business purposes. When I say business purposes, I'm mainly talking about delivery. I'm mainly talking about servicing, that type of thing. Farming is not considered business. So if somebody is driving around on their farm and they have a pickup truck, that is not considered business. Whereas we didn't really like the farm exposures in our homeowner and dwelling world, we always had to put those separate. Here, it's okay. So also, it's not just those private passenger vehicles, but also those same ones that you acquired during the policy period. Trailers are owned by the named insured. Now, trailer liability, you do not have to endorse this. So if you have a trailer and you hook it up to like a pickup truck and you're driving down the road and that trailer causes some damage to someone else's car or to someone else's property, that will be automatic liability under your vehicle. So you do not have to put an endorsement on there. So that's real important to understand. So any auto or trailer not owned by the named insured that is being used as a temporary substitute for a vehicle shown in the declaration that is out of use because of breakdown, repair, servicing, loss, or destruction. Now that's real important to remember, is this temporary substitute, because on the state test, they do ask for that. So anytime you see where you have a vehicle and you are using it because your vehicle is being repaired or serviced, that's called a temporary substitute. Now, your auto policy is very, very broad. It not only covers your owned vehicles, the ones that we just talked about up there under covered autos, but it also covers exposures for non-owned vehicles. So this is a vehicle you're driving, and maybe you have an auto accident. Now, remember, insurance always follows the vehicle, and we'll get to that in just a moment. So this is always on an excess basis. So if I'm driving Tom's car, and I have an accident in Tom's car, Tom's insurance is first. And then my liability coverage is excess. If Tom doesn't have enough insurance, or Tom has a situation where he doesn't have enough or he doesn't have any, then we have non-owned. So the great thing about the personal auto policy, it's a very, very broad policy. It not only covers covered autos, but it also covers non-owned autos and these temporary substitutes. Now, your standard coverages are going to be liability, med pay, uninsured, underinsured motorists, and damage to your auto. So let's talk about liability first. Liability covers damages for your bodily injury. It covers damages for your property damage that an insured becomes legally responsible for because of an auto accident. So, for example, I'm driving my vehicle and I hit Tom over here in his vehicle, and I damage Tom's car or I cause injury to him. That is liability. And I am legally responsible. Maybe I was looking at my phone. Maybe I wasn't paying attention. Regardless, I am negligent. So the policy only protects those who are considered insured. In other words, I'm an insured. I drive this vehicle. Remember, my spouse would be an insured, our family members, and anybody I give permission to. And again, you have to be legally responsible. Now, the great thing about this policy, as it did in the liability in our homeowner policy, is it does defend any claims or damages or defense causes by the company. So defense costs are addition to the limit of insurance as well. Now, when you hear the word supplemental payments go under liability. And supplemental payments are amounts paid under this section do not reduce the policy limit. And that's very important. So that's not only going to be important in the auto, but also in commercial general liability as well. So your supplemental limits, think about them being an extra bank over here. So you have your auto liability limits, which we'll go over, and then you have this extra bank of supplemental limits. And these will pay $250 for bail bonds, appeal bonds, post-judgment interest. Now remember, pre-judgment interest is included as part of the liability limit. So any post-judgment interest, any up to $200 per day for loss of earnings, and any other reasonable expenses that the insured requests. So again, when you think about supplemental payments, think about this extra bank over here that's in addition to your liability limits. And supplemental payments are the same, no matter if they're here in the auto or in commercial general liability, which we'll talk about. Now, what are some exclusions for liability? Well, anything that's intentionally done by the insured, if the insured intentionally causes a car wreck or intentionally injures someone, that is excluded. Damage to property owned or being transferred by the insured. My own property is not considered bodily injury property damage. If I have a truck and I just picked up a big TV and put it in my car and have an auto accident, my own property that I have in my car or that's in my care of myself is going to be excluded. Remember, it's all about third-party injuries. Bodily injury to an insured's employees. If a person is driving their vehicle and they are driving on business and they have an accident, any losses where they are injured are going to be covered under workers' compensation. Any type of personal auto exposures that are a taxi will not be covered under this policy. Now, keep in mind, we cover autos that we don't cover on personal auto. We cover those under our business auto. So any type of delivery, any type of service, any type of taxis are going to always be covered under the business auto. Now, things like Uber and those types of things, you're usually not going to get tested on those for the state test yet. But you usually have to let the company know that you're doing those types of exposures, and different companies work those different ways. As far as the state test is concerned, I would just remember that delivery and service and taxi vehicles, think about the yellow taxi. Those are all going to go in commercial, and they are not going to be part of your personal auto. Now, liability arising while the insured's auto is being used in an auto business. If you take your car to a repair shop and they test drive your car, or you come back the next day and your auto is gone, this policy is not going to pay for that. That needs to go under garage keepers, which we'll talk about a little bit when we get into our general liability policy as well. People that use your auto without permission, it does not apply to family members. Now, remember, family members are always okay. But people that use your auto without permission will not be protected under the liability policy. Anything that has to do with a nuclear energy liability policy, motorized vehicles with fewer than 4 wheels like motorcycles, any type of motorhomes, any type of golf carts, all of those situations are going to go under separate policies. Vehicles used in a prearranged racing or speed contest. Again, those are going to be excluded. And our service, delivery, and taxis are always going to go under that commercial auto exposure, which is in a different module. Now, how do your liability limits work? Now, one of the things, the reason why you have liability limits is this determines the maximum amount payable that is available to your liability claimant. So again, I'm driving my car. I have an at-fault accident. I hit Tom over here. My liability limits is going to be the maximum available to him, to those liability claimants. And it usually is split limits. Now, you need to check your state for your minimum liability limits. These liability limits are just an example, and these are your North Carolina liability limits. South Carolina is a different liability limits. They're like $25.50. But here in North Carolina, and you just need to know your state limits, and so be sure to check those. But it works the same way on how split limits work. So I'm going to share my screen here with you. And I'm going to talk about how these split limits will work and kind of put this in perspective for you. So let's say, for example, if a state has 30, 60, 25, this means 30,000, 60,000, 25,000. The first number is 30,000, and that's bodily injury. That's maximum for one person. Don't think of it as a bank. Think of it as, if I'm in a car accident, I'm negligent, and I injure a person, they're only going to get $30,000, even though I have $60,000 in my bodily injury bank. So $60,000 is the total bodily injury limit you have for that accident. And then $25,000 is for property damage. So let's say that I'm in an automobile accident, I'm at fault, I'm negligent, and the first person that I injure is $10,000. So the bodily injuries are $10,000. Well, you can pay one person up to $30,000. You have a $60,000 total bodily injury bank. So this policy will go ahead and pay out $10,000 bodily injury. Okay. So then let's say that our second person is injured. And again, this is just an example. I'm making this up as I go along here. We have $35,000 with the second person. Well, we only can pay out $30,000 for one person, even though we have a $60,000 bank for bodily injury. So this policy will pay out $30,000, not $5,000. So that person that is injured is either going to have to go under their uninsured motorist, under their underinsured motorist, or this person will get sued individually, talking about myself here in this example. Now, let's say that in that auto accident, we damaged their car and it was $20,000 for their car damage. So what will happen here is that is considered property damage. So this will pay out $20,000 because we have up to $25,000 in property damage. So you can see these are called split limits, and each state has their own minimum limits. Now, let's just for example purposes, let's say that our limits were 500 or 50, 150, just bumping them up a little bit. Well, in that case, this $10,000 person that was bodily injured would still get $10,000. That would be paid out. And then this 35,000, well, we can pay one person up to 50,000. So this total is going to get paid out. So you can see what bumping up your limits will do. It will pay out this whole claim because, of course, $20,000 for that car will definitely be paid out. And that would be $20,000 for that total. So, they'd pay out the total there because we've got up to 50,000 for property damage. So again, this first number is the per person. That's the maximum you're going to pay per person on bodily injury. 60,000, or the second number, is the most you're going to pay for that one accident in bodily injury. And 25,000 is the most you're going to pay for that one accident for property damage. So again, two examples of how this would work with the same numbers. Just bumping up this liability limit makes all the difference in the world. Okay, so going back to our screen here are your split limits. Now, financial responsibility. What this means is each driver has to prove that they can pay for bodily injury and property damage. Most states say that you have to purchase an auto policy with required limits of liability for that state. They also say out-of-state coverage. So let's say that you were in a state and you have 2550 and you drive into my state, which is North Carolina, of 3060. Well, your insurance, so that you will be okay in that state that you're driving in, will automatically go up to my state's minimum requirements. So let's say that your state only required 2550 and you drive into North Carolina, then you will automatically go up to 3060 if you drive into North Carolina. Now, if you have higher limits like 100, 350, they're not going to go down. It's just if you need to get up to that minimum in that state, because everything is state regulated. Now, note, if an individual is driving someone else's vehicle and is at fault for the accident, the insurance that follows the vehicle, the auto, not the driver. In other words, the vehicle's insurance is primary and the driver's insurance is excess. So if I am driving Tom's car and I have an at-fault accident, then Tom's insurance will be primary. And then if Tom doesn't have enough insurance, my insurance will be excess. So that is the non-owned. Remember, non-owned is only for excess. But again, your auto policy is very, very broad. It not only covers covered autos that you have listed on that deck, it also covers non-owned autos as well. And it also covers temporary autos for if you do have your car in a service repair type deal. Now, medical payments, this is our next coverage that we're going to be talking about. And medical payments are all about the occupants in the insured's vehicle. So this provides protections for the named insured, family members, and passengers in the named insured's auto for injuries received in an auto, regardless of fault. So let's say that I'm driving my car and I have Nancy who's sitting beside me, and she is a third party. And we get involved in that accident over here with Tom. Now, remember, Tom's body injury and his car damage is going to go under my liability. And then MedPay, if Nancy and I are injured, we each get MedPay per person. I get MedPay, she gets MedPay, and if she is still injured, she can also jump into that third-party liability pool as well. So it's not considered a form of liability. The other person in the car, Tom, will not get any medical payments. They go straight to liability. It does cover reasonable expenses, not only for medical, but also funeral services. that incur within 3 years of the date of the accident. Now, you may want to check this 3 years because some companies do 1 year, or some states, I should say, do 1 year and some do 3 years. So make sure that you do check that. So medical payments coverage is for the named insured, any family member, also if they're struck as a pedestrian. So if I'm walking and I get struck by a car, I can actually go under my med pay for where my car insurance is if I'm struck by a vehicle as a pedestrian. Now, you don't have that on a motorcycle. That's not the same thing as being a pedestrian there. So again, any other person while occupying the named insured covered auto, which is Nancy that is sitting next to me, will have med pay. Now you have the same exclusions or pretty much close to that as you do in liability. As far as a vehicle with fewer than 4 wheels, you can't have any taxis or any business exposures. Those go into commercial. If you are injured and you are driving for work, this is not med pay, that's workers' compensation. So again, you have a lot of the same exclusions that you had in liability. Now, as far as liability, as far as the limits of liability for MedPay, it is per person. And the typical limits are 1,000, 2,000, 5,000, or 10,000 per person. As you go up, the premium, of course, will go up per person. But I always tell my insurers, listen, MedPay is your coverage. So if you were injured in a car accident, this pays for your medical bills. So, and anybody else in your car. So if you have one of those insureds that is carpooling a lot or driving kids around, you're definitely going to want to put MedPay on your personal auto. Now, uninsured motorists and underinsured motorists, it really depends on what state you're in. But what is uninsured motorists as far as what most states have? And that's your typical, they have no liability coverage at the time of the accident as uninsured motorists, or they have an invalid liability coverage at the time of accident because their insurance company is insolvent or just denies coverage, and are the uninsured drivers at fault. So I'm driving my vehicle, I hit Tom's car, and I have no insurance. Or I have insurance, but my insurance company went bankrupt. Then Tom would go under his uninsured motorist coverage. Now, be sure to know your state law on hit and runs. It depends on every state. Like in my state of North Carolina, the only way hit and runs are covered is if that driver is that did the hit and run is identified. If it's a hit and run and they're never identified, then our insurers have to go under collision. Some states do hit and runs no matter what, if they're identified or not. So really know your state's law on what hit and runs and how they work, because those are different. Now, underinsured motorists, one of the things you've got to keep in mind here, this seems to be on the state test a lot, it is only for bodily injury. So again, if I have that accident, I hit Tom over here and I have insurance, I just don't have enough, and Tom is injured, then he can go under his underinsured motorist. But again, that is only for bodily injury for your underinsured motorist. So you have uninsured motorists and then you have underinsured motorists. Now, what are some physical damage coverages for your personal auto? So I've had that accident. I've hit Tom. I've been legally responsible. I was negligent, all of those buzzwords, third party, bodily injury, property damage. So he's been taken care of under my liability coverage, under bodily injury and property damage. But what about my car? It is damaged as well. So that would be collision. So collision is the impact of an auto covered by the policy with another object or vehicle, meaning Tom's car, I hit Tom's car, or maybe I hit a bridge, or maybe I hit a tree. Anytime you hit a tree, that's collision. Or the upset of a vehicle. I'm driving my car and I lose control of my car and it gets upset and it goes into a ditch. Or I hit an ice patch. All of that is collision, the upset of a vehicle. Now, other than collision, which is also called comprehensive, is your second coverage. So you have collision and you have other than collision. Now, one of the things I want to mention real quick is these coverages do not cover any personal property in the vehicle. We will get that question where someone says, hey, I left my laptop in my car, or I left my suitcase in my car and it was stolen. Does my auto policy cover that if I have comprehensive collision? And the answer to that is no. Remember, you have a homeowner policy that covers your property anywhere in the world, and that's the coverage that you're going to do. Now, when it comes to collision and other than collision, you can choose one or both of these coverages, meaning the named insured. These coverages also have deductibles on them that apply separately. So you're going to have a collision deductible and you're going to have an other than collision deductible. Now, we talked about what collision is, the impact of an auto covered by a policy with another object or vehicle or the upset. But other than collision or comprehensive, some companies call it other than collision, some companies call it comprehensive. These are the perils: missiles or falling objects, fire, theft, larceny, earthquake. Now, we didn't like earthquake and flood in our property policies, but here they're covered. Windstorm, hail, water, flood, vandalism, riot. This is where your bird or animal, if you hit a deer, this is where it's covered. Breakage of glass. Now, if breakage of glass is caused by collision, the insured has the option of treating it as a collision loss so that they won't have two deductibles. Another example would be if a tree falls on a car. Now, remember, if you hit a tree, that's collision, but if a tree falls on your car, that is other than collision or comprehensive. Know what proximate cause means. That is the very first peril that happens. So an example between this would be if the insured hits a building and the car catches on fire, the collision coverage will be triggered because this is what happened first. So that is what proximate cause is whatever peril happened first. Now, here are some duties after an accident or loss that you need to keep in mind. In the event of an uninsured motorist loss involving a hit and run driver, you have to notify the police. There's usually two times that you notify the police: uninsured motorists and also when your car has been stolen. If the loss is a physical damage loss, the insured must take reasonable steps to protect their auto. So if you've had a really bad car accident and you've got a lot of glass breakage and it's going to rain, then you need to go ahead and put a tarp over that car as a good example of your loss of your car having to be protected. Reasonable expenses will be reimbursed. Again, not just uninsured motorists, but if a vehicle is stolen, the police have to be notified. The insurance company must be permitted to inspect or appraise the vehicle. The insurance company must be notified first. You have to cooperate in the investigation of a claim. You have to authorize the insurance company to obtain medical records if that is needed, and submit to a medical exam if that is needed as well. One of the things you don't have to do is hire an attorney or get an appraiser. Again, the very first thing you need to do is go ahead and notify the insurance company. Now, there's some endorsements that you can put on your auto policy: towing and labor. This is considered a physical damage coverage endorsement in addition to your comprehensive and collision. And what does towing and labor do? It reimburses the insurer for the cost of having a vehicle towed. So your basic limits are $25. I've seen companies that will offer up to $100. Now, this labor part here, and if you're multitasking, come back to me because this is important. Labor must be performed at the place of disablement. Work performed after the vehicle is taken to a garage will not be covered. So if your car stops and you have to be towed and there's gas spewing out or oil spewing out, and before they can put it on the tow truck, they have to repair it there, then that could be covered within that limit. But if you get it back to the garage, of course, the labor won't be covered after that. So there's a towing and labor endorsement. There's an extended transportation expense. So remember, I had that auto accident with Tom. Tom's injuries, Tom's car is all going to go under my liability, bodily injury, and property damage. My car damages are going to go under collision with a deductible. And then I need to get my car repaired. So while my car is being repaired, hopefully I have purchased this extended transportation expense. So this is where that situation where I can get a rental car. And usually the limits are $30 per day, subject to $900 maximum. You can have higher limits available as well. It also covers, and this is something people don't realize that extended transportation expense covers, arising out of the total theft of an auto. you could have transportation expense. There is a 40-hour waiting period. So you do have this 40-hour waiting period before expenses will be paid. This will be paid even on an unendorsed vehicle. So even if you just have comprehensive, which is theft coverage, and your car is getting stolen and you did not pay for this extended transportation expense, they will give you a rental car. So keep that in mind when you do your state test. So again, it's reasonable time that is required to repair or replace your vehicle that you will have this rental car. They'll also pay for loss of use expenses. My daughter was in an accident a couple years ago, and it wasn't her fault. And so the company wanted to give her a rental car while her car was being repaired, but she was underage. She could not get a rental car because I think you have to be 23, and she was like 20 at the time. So what they did is they gave us loss of use expenses, like her taking Uber or us having to take her and or her carpooling, that type of thing. Those are loss of use expenses. Now remember, when it comes to these coverages, really the only coverage that I can think of that has a deductible is your comprehensive and collision. There is no deductible on towing and labor. There is no deductible on this extended transportation expense. Now, what is extended non-owned coverage? Remember, I told you that you had very, very broad coverage in your auto. You have your owned auto, and then you have your non-owned auto. So if I'm driving Tom's car and Tom doesn't have any insurance, then my car would go over on top. Or if Tom doesn't have enough insurance, Tom's car would be first. We would totally exhaust his limits, and then my non-owned would come on top of that. Now, companies are really kind of thinking that this is not for regular use. In other words, maybe I borrowed Tom's car because my car's in the shop, or maybe Tom's car was parked behind mine and I need to run a quick errand and he said, take my car. But if there's a situation where a car is furnished to you on regular use, then you will not have non-owned coverage unless you put this extra endorsement on there. So an example is a company car. So if I'm driving my company car that I'm using every single day, and I have an at-fault accident, and that company car's liability limits are not enough, then my non-owned personal auto coverage will not go over that company car unless I have this extended non-owned coverage. Any cars that your insureds are being furnished on a regular basis, like a company car, you need to put this extended non-owned coverage on their personal auto policy for their non-owned liability to extend over. Because again, that's the exception. If it's for regular use, like a company car, then your auto non-owned will not extend. Now, your liability, med pay, uninsured motors, if you were to acquire an auto, it replaces the one listed in the deck. The new auto automatically has the broadest coverage, and you may want to check your state situation here. It could be provided for any vehicle already listed in the declarations, or your state may say that it has to be the auto that it replaced. So, you just really have to look at that as far as your state's concerned. I know in North Carolina, it has to be the auto that it replaced. So in other words, if I go and I purchase another vehicle and I have a personal auto policy, I need to make sure that the vehicle that I'm replacing has those same coverages, because in North Carolina, it's going to be the same coverages of the auto that you replaced. The key here is 30 days. You do need to call the company regardless and add that car on within 30 days. Now, again, insurance is very state driven. So no fault states, this is where drivers have insurance to cover their own injuries and damage rather than insuring to pay out to the other person. Some states are no-fault states. Here in North Carolina, we are not a no-fault state. We are considered a contributory negligence state. So that means if any person contributed any way, whether it's 1% or 20%, then the judgment is going to be 0. So an operator is partially at fault. So if it goes to court, or if it's determined on the police report, doesn't even have to go to court, that both of them contributed to this accident, then neither one can go under each other's insurance. And companies are definitely hanging their hats on that contributory negligence. Comparatory negligence is totally different. This is when both parties are negligent and damages are apportioned between them according to their degrees of negligence. But again, most states are contributory negligence as far as that's concerned. Okay, friends, so this is the supplemental material on your personal auto. I hope this has helped you clear some situations so that you can go ahead and pass your state exam. Again, my motto is prepare, repetition, and confidence. You've got to repeat this stuff over and over. You've got to read it 2, 3, 4, and 5 times to be able to understand it so that you will have confidence when you pass that test. One of my favorite sayings is, we generate fears while we sit, we overcome them by action. And that's by Dr. Henry Leak. So study, really learn the material, and I will catch you in the next module.